Give away the puzzle.
We are ready for the next train around the corner.
This is Train to Nowhere. It's the Giordano Neri Express, the world's first self-driving train. Come on in.
Self-driving train?
All aboard!
Wow.
So when you solve all the puzzles in this room, you discover that
near Georgetown, South Carolina, with maximum sustained winds miles per hour. And that's where the center is, but the trouble has extended up the South Carolina coast into North Carolina. We're getting huge storm surge overrunning many areas from Pawleys Island to Myrtle Beach, Garden City, Grove City, all the way up towards Ocean Isle, Oak Island, all the way into Wilmington, North Carolina. We're seeing some of that storm surge moving to the north. Let me show you some of the wind speeds and the radar currently. We can see on the coast near the center, that's where the strongest winds are right now. We've got 40 to 45 and even 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts in and around Georgetown, Mount Pleasant, Charleston, and near Florence and Myrtle Beach area. So that's where we're seeing the strongest winds. If we look at the radar, we could see that circulation rotating right there around Georgetown. Now there's the really strong band on the northwest side, and that's important for us here in the Piedmont of North Carolina because that band right there is going to move north. As the whole center begins to drive to the north, we are going to see some of the heaviest rain we've seen so far move into the Charlotte metro area. So you start to look at some of these rain bands. I mean, look at these coming up through Chesterfield, Lancaster into Mecklenburg County. So the rain we've had so far today has been relatively light. It's been blowing around about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, some of the highest totals, which isn't all that bad because it started around sunrise. But these bands coming in this evening are going to be much heavier, and they're also going to provide some very strong winds as they move in. That's when we're going to see our highest wind gusts. So as we look at the future track of Ian as it moves up into our area, you can see the forecast track takes it just towards Florence and Darlington, weakens it briefly tonight to a tropical storm, maybe 60-mile-an-hour winds, probably more extra tropical. I think actually this feels more like a nor'easter than a tropical system, and then that effect is really the same. But what the difference is what you're feeling out there today. It feels like it's in the 50s. It feels chilly. We're starting to see kind of cold conditions, and we're seeing that wind howling from the northeast, hence the name nor'easter. That's where the nor'easter name comes from. So you can see up by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, it's near Greensboro, and by the time we get to tomorrow night, it's all the way up into Virginia, West Virginia, moving away from us. So let's look at Futurecast, because I think Futurecast is going to tell us a lot about what to expect this evening. This is going to show you the future radar, but also the wind gusts. So those numbers you see on the map, that's actually the wind gust predicted by our Futurecast guidance. So as we go into the future, at 5 p.m., we could have gusts over 40 in the Charlotte area, maybe even close to 50 with extremely heavy rain. So the evening rush hour is looking quite treacherous. That's why I'm so glad so many schools went virtual or canceled completely. We go further into the future, 7 o'clock, the heavy rain band starts to shift a little bit to the west, but it's still over the Piedmont. By 9 or 10 o'clock, the worst of it should start to lift north and move into the mountains and foothills. That's where we'll start to see some of the heavier rain bands. And then by the time we get to 7 in the morning tomorrow, all of this is starting to move out of the area. So Saturday is looking much better. If you could just get through tonight, by tomorrow we should see much better weather starting to build into the region. I did want to show you the wind gusts we've seen so far today because this has been ahead of the main action. 35-mile-per-hour wind gusts. That's our current wind gust in Charlotte. 41 in Rockingham, 33 in Albemarle, 30 up in Salisbury. So this is even well ahead of the main winds and winds and rain, I should say, that are actually starting to come up from the south and the east. So that will be something we'll watch through the evening as that trend in higher wind speed starts to move in. So if you're looking for a timeline for the worst weather in the Charlotte area, most of the Piedmont, it's really going to be that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the evening time frame, and give or take a couple hours depending on where you are, because all of this mess will be moving up to the north fairly quickly. We're getting a lot of reports from the coast of that storm surge that we feared verifying, where Ocean Isle Beach overwashed, Garden City. Some of these pictures we're seeing, you see some of those. That's Topsail Island right there. And what's happened in many of these locations, we've seen the surge come through the dunes and overwash the island, but we're also seeing a lot of water coming from the marsh and intercoastal side, because we're starting to see some of that water getting into the marshes and the intercoastal, and the tide not going back out. And then when the next tide came up, it just basically flooded these islands. Now, our Vanessa Rufus has been down in the Charleston area where they had some huge flooding yesterday, partially because of the surge, but also the rain. And I see behind you, Vanessa, there's still a lot of water on the streets down there.
Oh yeah, indeed, Brad. So yes, we're actually over by MUSC, and you can see here on this particular road, we got the water coming up probably about halfway to my knees, and I tried this earlier, but I didn't want to wade too far. If I went down closer to this intersection down here, it would probably get up to my knees. And we've seen some large trucks, some lifted trucks try to take their chances coming on down this roadway. Obviously not recommended. It looked like some of those were able to get through, but we've also been seeing that intersection behind my photographer here, Kevin Wardlaw. Folks trying to make that turn onto this roadway, they kind of take a look at all of this standing water and they go, no, we're not going to do it. And I would say that's a pretty wise judgment. We're seeing the latest count as far as road closures from flooding in Charleston, around 45 or so. And that has gone up from earlier this morning when we were kind of out roaming about. We went out by the Battery. We actually ran into a tow truck driver who was posted up over by the Battery, and he was just sitting there waiting for people to save, because he'd already saved 2 people already today. Who were just curious. They wanted to venture out in their vehicles and they got stuck in high water. So just a cautionary tale, right? Turn around, don't drown, don't chance it. Really doesn't take that much water to take your vehicle away. We will say, as far as the conditions here, a lot better than I'd say maybe a half hour ago, an hour ago. We did that live report around 2 o'clock this afternoon. And I mean, the gusts were huge. We're still getting some gusts, but I would say they're much more on the gentler side. The rain, as you can probably see here, it's lightened up. We really just have like a little bit of a sprinkle going. Yeah, the flooding, I'm not even sure how long it's going to take for this to go down. I mean, this is pretty substantial. I mean, hopefully soon, because it is impacting, like I mentioned, several dozen roadways around Charleston, and that's going to be a lot to contend with for folks who eventually want to venture out and get back to life. So, Brad, I'll send it back to you. I don't know if you have any questions for me out here, but yeah, this is a little bit better of conditions than what we were seeing earlier.
Yeah, and when I saw your earlier reports, that's the band that's going to move through Charlotte here coming up in a couple hours. So for folks that didn't see that earlier, it was really howling down there as that band came through. Now, Vanessa, I'm curious, is the water going down at all, or has it just been kind of stable there?
To me, I mean, it feels stable. It feels stable. I know we're kind of taking a look here around here. We have several inches up on the sidewalk. It gets a little bit deeper out on the roadway. I don't think it is going down. And you know what's interesting too? I think we're a little too far away to show this, but I did tweet this video out. We've been sheltering this afternoon in a parking deck over by MUSC. They have little like storm drain, I don't know if they're pumps, but they're storm drains of some sort in the ground. And we're actually seeing the water like come up out of the ground. So it's actually like pumping the water into the parking deck. So I don't know if that bodes well, but it doesn't seem to be receding in my opinion.
Yeah, the thing about downtown Charleston.
I will say some good news.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I will say some good news as far as the winds go. They've subsided enough that emergency services have resumed for Charleston County, because they did have to suspend those for a bit because of the high-profile ambulances. So
yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, the downtown Charleston area there near the Battery, when we get high storm surge, it comes up through the storm drains like that because it comes in from the harbor, because that's where they all drain. So I've seen that a couple of times. So thanks, Vanessa. We'll check back in with you in a minute. I'm going to bring in Brittany Van Boer. He's here in the Weather Center as well. We're tracking these winds, and I'm just looking at some of the power outages. In South Carolina right now, 180,000 people without power, all of those down in the low country. And now the North Carolina outages are starting to go up, basically around 53,000. So we've got some significant power outages because of the winds, and the winds are going to be a big story.
Yeah, and here in the Charlotte area, of course, we're thinking tropical storm force gusts at the highest, right? So 45 miles an hour. But some of the peak wind gusts, Brad, Chutes Folly Beach near Charleston there, 92 miles per hour. Yeah,
I saw some of those. There's some of those elevated sensors, which are a couple, 30, 40 feet off the ground, so they're going to be higher. But that's pretty high. That kind of verifies the 85 mile an hour wind gust, wind speed, at least with the maximum near the center.
Yeah, I know that when it was making landfall, we had 85. We were thinking I mean, 85
Yeah.
still because of the fact that it had been kind of sitting in the same place
Well,
for
and it
hours.
doesn't really look like a typical
Yeah.
hurricane. It looks like a nor'easter. So it's just goes to show you how powerful this is, even though it doesn't look great on a radar satellite.
Yeah, so it was Fort Sumter, Georgetown getting 85 miles an hour. Of course, we know that Georgetown is where the storm made landfall, and then Chutes Folly Beach at 92. But here in the Charlotte area, 45 miles per hour
Yeah.
at a peak, 1 to 3 inches of rain, likely here in Mecklenburg County, likely east a little bit higher. But I think in grand scheme of things, right, we're thankful that the
Yeah.
storm has continued, at least for us here, continue to move east. Now, there have been some reports of some trees down and some isolated power outages.
Yeah, already in the Charlotte area, right?
Yeah, power lines down actually along Mount Holly Road. That's near Paw Creek there in Mecklenburg County. So just a good reminder, right, if you're going to be out and about in these areas, to take it easy. And if you don't have to drive, don't do so. This live picture there that we have, or the video, was actually a neighborhood there in Noda earlier today, Brad, that you can kind of see.
Well, that looks, just at first glance there, that tree doesn't look too healthy.
Yeah, that's fair to say, right? And I
Yeah.
actually was at Davy Tree yesterday doing actually a story about leaves changing. And while I was there, I was like, you know, I'm just going to ask you some questions, right,
Yeah.
about, you know, hurricanes, tropical storms preparing. And he kind of said, which is unfortunate, is at this point it was kind of too late, right, for people
Yeah.
to start to trim those trees back. But that tree health, especially during hurricane season, is more of an all season long thing. You should start to kind of plan for that early rather than later. But he had some good advice for folks who maybe were concerned. Maybe they have a big tree in their front
Yeah.
yard. I know my parents down in Florida, right, have a big oak tree, so
Sure.
they're always kind of staying on the side of the house that is
that's
away from the tree.
That's a good tip. If you're worried about that tree, go to the other side where you think it
Yeah.
might come down. And you know, one of the things, this is still pretty early in the autumn. We haven't had a lot of the leaves come off the trees yet, which boded well because it didn't clog up the storm drains, but more leaves mean more surface area for the wind to push on. So potentially it could be more tree damage. And as you know, this is such a beautiful tree city, but we have a lot of shallow tree roots. And
Yeah.
so they tend to blow over pretty easily. And if we get some water on that soil, it's not going to take a lot to blow them over. I'm kind of shocked we're seeing so many trees down already because the strongest winds aren't even remotely close to getting here yet.
Yeah, those look to be, you said basically essentially now through about 7 p.m. It looks
Yeah.
like we'll see the highest wind gusts.
Looking at this band on the northwest side, you know, we're looking at the radar, and even though the winds extend really far out from the center to the east, there's a really intense band on the northwest side, which is going to be the area that impacts Charlotte because the center is going to track to the east. Normally, we'd be much more concerned to be on the right side or the east side of a tropical system. But as I mentioned, this is kind of a hybrid system. It kind of looks like a nor'easter, and a nor'easter is just kind of a cold season hurricane. But the difference is the strongest winds are sometimes removed from the center. And in this case, even the hurricane hunters earlier, I know the pass they made this morning, they noted that the strongest winds were in the northwest quadrant, which is the one that's heading towards the Midlands of South Carolina right now. So that's the only thing that has me concerned. It's been pretty tame. I mean, it's not been a beautiful day, let's be honest. There's
it's
leaves
been
and debris
nasty.
everywhere. It's been ugly out there. It's been cold. But that band, if that sets up over Charlotte, we could see it go from 0 to 60 pretty quick with trees and winds really taking off. And maybe seeing 40, 50-mile winds for a couple of hours this evening before things do subside.
And that's what we were talking about this a little bit yesterday, is the one positive that we do have to look at least here in the central Carolinas, is the fact that Ian has been really lopsided, you know, even since leaving Florida. So you can see as Brad zooming out here on Doppler radar, there's not really a lot of rain on the southern and southeastern tip of the storm. So
Yeah, so if you get to the south side down here, you dry out fairly quickly.
yeah, Savannah, Georgia, I mean, completely dry. Southern portions of the South Carolina coast starting to dry out too. So at least the rain, you know, if the storm was a little bit healthier right on the southern side, we would expect more rain over a longer period of time. But like Brad mentioned, of course, it's that northwestern side, if you're looking at the map there, down toward closer to Columbia, but that'll eventually be coming our way.
Yeah, so it's interesting that, you know, we talked about why it looks like a nor'easter. It looks like a big comma. So you see this, the storm is like this, and then there's a little band out here, but the storm is definitely lopsided to the right, but this little band right here is the one that has some of the most intense winds. So it's a weird looking storm. It doesn't look like your typical tropical system, but it has so much wind energy in it because it moved pretty quickly across Florida, got over the water for a while off the Florida coast. That really started cranking up. See my computer going off. We're getting some tornado warnings in eastern North Carolina, kind of where we expected. Some of the pictures we're seeing, I didn't hear you guys. This is down in
Said I-95 near Lake Mary.
Okay, so that's not too far from the coast, and you're seeing some pretty rough weather there. I mean, that's the thing about today. You know, we heard that Vanessa said that the emergency crews are back out. You know, and a lot of folks asked today, why aren't schools closed or why are businesses closed? These high-profile vehicles and 40, 50-mile-an-hour winds, it's tough to drive. In fact, it's dangerous. And just driving into work on the interstate, the wind is really rocking. You got to have two hands on the steering wheel today because it is really rocking and rolling. What's interesting, too, I must have gotten a bazillion questions about flights in and out of Charlotte Douglas. There are delays and cancellations out there, but operations at the airport have not changed. They're completely open. So it's all about the individual airlines deciding, hey, I don't want to put planes there, or I don't want to fly planes in there. So call ahead. If you have flights tonight or early tomorrow, I would definitely check with your airline. But so far, looking at Charlotte Douglas operations, nothing has changed. It's just been the same out there.
Yeah, and you know, tropical storms, you know, more so than hurricanes, you know, planes do fly through them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily the safest or maybe even the least turbulent.
Yeah, it's going to be a rough flight.
Yeah, it's going to be rough for
landing.
sure. I actually had to fly through Tropical Storm Cindy back in 2017 on the way home from my Mississippi State to present my master's research, and that was definitely turbulent, but yes, it does happen, of course. So like Brad said, you want to check in. Something else to note too that I thought was interesting that the Davy Tree expert told me was not just, you know, trying to plan to go to the opposite side, right, of your home if you're worried about a tree, but something else that you can do too is if you have a basement. I know not everyone around this area has them, but some do. You can try to stay there, or of course if you're on a 1 or 2 story home, like let's say the bedrooms are upstairs, but you got your living room downstairs, maybe just a good idea to stay on the ground level.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, secure the loose items in your yard as well, because one of the things that makes these storms dangerous is not always with the wind, it's what the wind picks up and throws at your house, whether it's a tree branch or a tree. But I've seen oftentimes patio furniture or those umbrellas. You know, everyone's got the patio umbrellas. That thing will fly out and go flying and smash a window, dent the car, break the sliding glass door. So take that stuff inside and kind of secure it, because once that becomes airborne, then that becomes more dangerous for not only you, your home, your car, but maybe your neighbor's property as well.
Yeah, and we're not expecting a high risk by any stretch, right, for spin up tornadoes. But, you know, we say that during, tornado warnings to go into the interior room of your home. Oftentimes it's not just because we're worried about glass breaking, like you mentioned. It's that flying debris, because other portions of your house, other maybe lawn furniture, things like that can go flying, and they don't want to, it's why you have your selfie in your helmet, right? But it's true, in your safe place, because you don't want to get your head hit. You don't want that umbrella, coming through and trying to pierce anything. So all those things are good. Gaston County, we just did get another report there of a tree blocking a roadway. So nothing crazy, but just these trickling in reports, which I just think it's important.
They're starting to pick up a little bit more. We're getting a lot more out there. And so, I was saying yesterday, I would not advise traveling this evening. The evening rush is going to be rough. And we're starting to see the number of reports come in. A tree down here, water on the road, just heavy traffic volume. It's going to make getting around Charlotte here this evening kind of rough. So this is our futurecast, and the numbers on the map are showing the forecasted wind gusts, not sustained winds. And you can see to our east, we're getting some gusts to 50, 55. But right around 4 or 5 o'clock, you could see Charlotte probably in the worst of the wind and rain. It's that one band. We'll have to see where it kind of sets up. It looks like there's 2 separate bands that try to move through. And what often happens in tropical systems, the winds are stronger as you go up into the atmosphere. And when you get these heavy rain bands, what they do is they mix some of those stronger winds down to the surface. So once you get a heavy rain band, it's usually kind of like a squall. It co-locates with the heavier wind, and then it moves in. So by midnight, things improve. Look at the winds really dropping off. And those are the gusts, by the way, only about 10 to 15. So that's a pretty good sign. And as bad as we thought the weekend was going to be maybe 3 or 4 days ago, it sure does look much better for the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So that's the other reason to stay home tonight. It's just tonight. You're not going to ruin the whole weekend. If you could just hold out for tonight, wait till tomorrow and Sunday to get your activities done, you should be fine.
Yeah, and I will say, if you are sensitive to the cool weather, one thing you should know, right, is that the highs will still be in the 60s.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because someone asked me today, have you ever had to talk about wind chill in a hurricane or a tropical storm? And I said, honestly, I don't think I ever have, but I wanted to grab the wind chill map, because I do think it'll be interesting to see what the wind chills look like. Let me see if I can find it now.
Yeah, typically you don't see a wind chill if our temps aren't below about 50, but it can definitely feel cool. And I think that's why you've been saying so much. I heard it yesterday, I heard it today. It really does. It truly does not feel like a tropical storm or hurricane.
No, not
it feels
at all.
like a nor'easter.
So I have current heat index on there, but it's actually the wind chill. So we're going to do feels like reading because that's probably more accurate.
We have not had to change this since the summer, folks.
So it's actually the same calculation. So you look at the wind chill, basically, low and mid 50s, but at one point today, the wind chill was in the 40s this morning. It was I think it was 53 degrees, and we had a north wind at 20 or 30, and the wind chill was 48. That is cold for late September. That is just something we haven't seen since the spring.
Yeah, and it's not the high upper 40s like we had earlier this week for lows where it was sunny and beautiful. So the afternoon got to the mid 70s. Even though we're going to see those clearing conditions Saturday and Sunday, we'll still see highs in the 60s. So
yeah, look at those are the current temperatures. You can see how cool it is out there. So imagine 55, 56, 57 degrees with a northeast wind at 30 or 40, and you got rain. So if you're in the elements out there, I do want you to make sure, for exposure reasons, you're protected with either a heavy jacket or a rain jacket, because if you get wet, that just adds further issues. This is a pretty cool shot to see our 4 cameras here. The one in particular I love looking at is Dallas. So our Dallas camera, for those that know, we have a transmitter over there in Dallas, which is not Dallas, Texas. It's Dallas, North Carolina, which is in Gaston County, up there at 1,400 feet, 1,450 feet to be exact. We have a camera. So let's bring that up. I'm going to bring that up real quickly. I want you to look at the clouds. I'm just going to leave this up. Look at those clouds flying by. What do you think the wind speed is up there, Brittany?
Well, okay, so close to the ground, we're seeing gusts around like 20, 25 right now, probably 35 to 40.
Yeah,
close to tropical storm force.
I would say,
guess.
we're probably getting close to 40. The camera's actually shaking, which is telling you something, because this is a pretty sturdy tower. And what's also cool is we're actually not in the clouds. We're actually, now I say that, some clouds go by.
A lot of the clouds do look to be kind of off in the distance. It looks like we're seeing kind of that little thin band. I love this camera, especially in the morning when you have fog. And you see it close to the ground, and then high up it's sunny. So you're like, I promise people, once the fog's gone, it's going to be sunny. And we will see some peaks of sunshine this weekend too. I don't want you to hear cloudy, cool, and think, oh my gosh, it's going to be terrible. But we will see some peaks of sun, but just not today. Yeah, so we're getting tons of questions about, the Charlotte FC game tomorrow night. I think that game is at 5:30, if I'm not mistaken. And then the interesting thing, the Panthers game is also a late game as well. It's a 4 o'clock kickoff. Both of those probably going to be just fine. There might be a scattered shower. I'd bring the poncho just in case, but it will not be a deluge, and there might even be sunshine for both of those games, at least peaks of sunshine. The one word of caution, though, both those games start before sunset. They're likely going to end after sunset. It's going to get cool really quickly when that sun goes down. Yeah, so you think high 66, okay, mostly cloudy. Maybe I just need the long sleeve. Maybe I can leave the sweatshirt at home. I agree with Brad. I would bring it, especially if you're maybe a true Charlottean, right? And you're not maybe this time of year is not your favorite. You'll definitely need that, especially if you got a long walk, right? I know a lot of folks take the light rail, to those games to not have to worry about parking. You guys know it's not the worst walk, but it's definitely a walk. And if it's breezy at all and the sun's down, it's gonna feel cool. The thing is, going outside for a couple minutes is one thing. Spending several hours outside, you get colder and colder and colder, and all of a sudden you realize, boy, I wish I would have brought a jacket. So it's not the initial time you're outside, it's just the length of it, the duration that you spend out in the elements, especially when the wind starts blowing. So you're looking at some live pictures from Charlotte. Pretty quiet for a Friday afternoon, which is kind of nice. A lot of events, schools, and even some businesses, they weren't necessarily closed or canceled, but a lot of folks went remote today. They kind of decided, I'm going to stay off the roads and work remote. So a lot of folks are able to do that and just alleviate some of the stress, really for first responders, because they're going to have to be out responding to these trees that we're seeing come down, and just to have less traffic makes it easier for them to get out and respond to that. I keep going back and forth to some of the power outages. What's interesting is the biggest power outages now are in Robeson County. It looks like about 8,000 people out there. So in the southeastern part of North Carolina, we're seeing a lot of outages. The state total is 53,000. I'm going to look back at South Carolina and see what the totals are. We're now, the totals have really spiked in South Carolina, 186,000 people. And it's just in those areas, right, we're expected, down toward Georgetown County, starting to see those increase in parts of, Horry County, things like that, where closer to where the storm made landfall. That looks like what, about 30 to 40% of people? Yeah, that's a pretty big chunk. Yeah, so that's Myrtle Beach. Look at is that the Spring Maid Pier? I can't tell.
Boy, look at the waves on that. So, if you haven't seen our social media or heard from other people, it looks like 2 piers have collapsed in South Carolina. Pawleys Island Pier.
And it was Cherry Grove.
And
right,
the Cherry Grove Pier, at least part of it. It doesn't look like the whole pier, but a big chunk of it came off. The Springmaid Pier, which is there in downtown Myrtle Beach, had their 3rd highest water level on record today. Right around where Isaias is and just behind, get this, Matthew and Hugo. So pretty significant water. And part of the reason we saw so much water with this system was it's such a large wind field, and the shape of the southeast coast just funneled all of that water directly in. This is a case where the category of the storm doesn't really take into account storm surge. If there's one thing we can learn from Ian, and I hope we learn this from every storm, is that the category of storm, we hear a lot about, is it a Cat 1, a Cat 2, whatever, that is only the maximum sustained winds near the middle. It doesn't say anything about rain, flooding, surge, tornadoes. None of that is factored into categories. And we've seen these weaker systems from a wind standpoint have these huge wind fields, which is like, instead of having a little bulldozer, it's like having a giant bulldozer to push water towards the coast, and you end up getting a ton of storm surge.
Yeah, and also it's just one of those things we want you to take, caution no matter what, because whether it's a hurricane, a tropical storm, we see it, right, especially in the spring here in the Carolinas, a severe weather event. It's not about severe weather, tropical weather, it's about impact.
Yeah.
Impact.
Yeah, if this was a nor'easter, wouldn't matter. It's going to have the same impacts. If it's got a hurricane name, a tropical name, it doesn't matter. It's the impacts. That surge was going to come either way, even if it was a nor'easter. But the fact that it was a hurricane previously, I think what happened in Florida has made people ultra sensitive and paying super attention to Ian, which is good news.
Yeah.
Which is good news.
Yeah.
But it's also, thank goodness, not the surge that we saw on the southwest side of Florida, which was just absolutely devastating. So, looking at these bands, I think we're really starting to see the heavy rain bands move into our South Carolina, Charlotte now.
Yeah, it looks like Mecklenburg.
Actually, what I want to do is look at the velocity data, because we should start to see. So this is the velocity data from the terminal Doppler radar. And what I would love to do is just take a look and see at some of the wind speeds. So this obviously is not at ground level. It's probably a couple hundred feet off the ground. But the fact that we're getting some winds, now down there, that's almost, at that distance, almost 800-900 feet off the ground. And then north of Charlotte, you could see the negative means it's blowing towards the radar, not that it's a negative wind speed. That's a directional component. And over in Gaston County, not too far from our site, we've got some 25, 30, 45 mile an hour winds. So it kind of gives you an idea. The winds are starting to pick up, at least off the surface. And if we get these heavy rain bands to move in like we're starting to see, that's going to start mixing down the surface, because clearly, boy, that looks like some really heavy rain coming in right now.
Yeah, it looks like that. This is kind of the start. I would say, of probably our worst.
Yeah, and we kind of thought, I'm looking at the clock, it's 3 o'clock. I mean, the timing of this has actually been pretty spot on. The track has shifted a little bit. I think we get nitpicky about the track. We're talking like a couple counties, east or west. And as we just mentioned, it didn't really change the overall impacts for us. But the impacts have been the same, The biggest, so that's the Monroe camera. Well, that's that band coming through Monroe right now, and you could see it is coming down. Now, this camera isn't nearly as high as our Dallas camera, but it's on the top of the government building there, which I think is either 5 or 6 stories tall. I probably might be overestimating that, but I think it's several floors up there. So that would be maybe 50, 60 feet off the ground, and it's rocking and rolling pretty good.
Yeah, I feel like that's something we see a lot, right, with these cameras is, they start to shake and you're like, okay, it's again, it's not a hurricane force wind, but it's at least decent wind. That's a good idea for people to stay inside. I think that's one of the benefits, right, of so many folks being able to work remotely now, like you mentioned earlier, is that if it's unsafe, or maybe not the safest to be on the roads, kind of like today, they have that choice. So hopefully a lot of you live streaming with us are doing so from the comfiness of your couch.
Now, the one thing I'll tell you, we're going to wrap up, and then we're going to continue our coverage on air coming up in an hour at 4 o'clock. One thing, you made me think about this working from home. It's all great until the power goes out. And that could be a concern, especially in the next couple of hours as the winds and the rain pick up. So one thing I would love for you to do is just plug your phone in, leave it plugged in and charged. If you have some of these battery backups, do that as well. Charge everything up in your house, the tablets, computers, everything you need right now in case the power does go out tonight. The good news is I think if the power does go out, it'll be on relatively quickly because this storm will move in and out and the crews can get out there. And I will tell you, Duke kept a bunch of crews here, didn't send them to Florida to help just in case we did have damage here. So they are going to be able to respond really quickly.
Yeah, and I think also, too, with how cool it's been, if you're someone who likes to have the windows open,
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead and do it now because even as we get some sunshine mixing in Saturday, Sunday, I mean, I hope no one has no power for that long. But it just, you could go ahead and cool your house.
Yeah.
I know that's a trick a lot of Floridians do, right? Just in case they cool
Get
the
it
house
chilled.
down before.
And, you know, I actually opened the windows 2 days ago, and it got so cold I shut the window because that's how cold it was today. And I love it, but it is a good idea. Maybe get it a little cooler in your house because then you won't need the AC. And it's a lot easier to warm your house in this situation than it is to cool it down. So, you know, if you can, get it nice in there. And the other thing, if you have an issue with stuff in your freezer or refrigerator, just leave it in there shut. Do not open it. It acts like a cooler. It'll keep it chilled and cooled long enough. I do this. My kids don't leave it open. Don't open and close it all the time because then you lose the chance. So, you know, just leave it in there. It'll be okay.
Yeah, and like you said, I think that with the fact that Duke left a lot of crews here, things like that, based on our impacts, hopefully any of those power outages that do happen will be short-lived.
Well, thanks for tuning into our live stream here. We will continue to post updates. You know, if you follow us on social media, that we will be posting frequent updates. And of course, all our coverage starts at 4, 5, 6, and 11 tonight on WCNC, but it will be streamed as well. If you don't have the WCNC app, you can stream our coverage there. You don't actually have to live in our viewing area to watch our newscast. You can watch it there as well, or you can watch it on our website. We also have the Roku and the Amazon Fire app. So there are multiple ways to get information. We need you to stay weather aware this evening because it could be rough for a couple hours, but the good news is we're going to get through it and the weekend looks fun.
Yeah, the weekend looks a lot better. We actually toned it back, took the weather aware off of Saturday. So
and I'm happy with that because we need some time to have a great weekend. So it's on a Friday night, maybe not the best night to head out with the family, but stay inside. Good pizza night, movie night would be tonight in the home. For Brittany Van Voorhees, I'm Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich. We're going to go back to our WCNC Plus stream, and we'll see you at 4 o'clock.
Sound today. We know power outage is always a real possibility.